So you may have seen when we were setting up virtual machines in the past, there's a concept within Microsoft Azure called network security groups. Now, network security groups, or NSGs, are a core way to control network access in Azure. They act like a firewall using allow or deny rules based on things like IP address, port, and protocol. NSGs can be associated with either the subnet or the network interface card, or NIC. And each rule includes a priority, and the rule with the lowest priority number that matches will win. So I'm in the Azure portal, and I've searched for network security groups. I'm going to click Create, and I've chosen a subscription, and you can choose a resource group. I'm going to put this into AZVM, an existing resource group. Now I'm going to give it a name. So in this case, I'm going to call it Demo NSG. And we have to choose a region. Now this region should be the same as your subnet or your virtual machine that you want to associate this NSG with. We don't need to deal with tags, so we're creating a default basic NSG. We're going to say review and create, and then create. Now, like I said, the network security group acts like a firewall. It's what's called an access control list, and it contains both inbound and outbound rules that which traffic is allowed onto the network and which traffic would be specifically denied. Now you'll see from this that there are a set of default rules. So we already have 3 rules on the inbound and 3 rules on the outbound that is given to us that we can't control. Let's look at them. I'm going to go under settings, under inbound security rules to start, and I'm going to minimize this menu. So we can see that there are 3 rules. They are given the default rules. So we already have 3 rules on the inbound and 3 rules on the outbound that is given to us that we can't control. Let's look at them. I'm going to go under settings, under inbound security rules to start, and I'm going to minimize this menu. So we can see that there are 3 rules. They are given the highest priorities. So typically the rules that you create will have lower numbers, thus higher priorities. And they are that all traffic from the virtual network is allowed. All traffic from a load balancer is allowed, and all other traffic is denied. So if you have a network that's associated with a default network security group that you have not modified, it's only going to allow traffic from the virtual network and the load balancer. It's not going to allow any other traffic onto that network. That is a access control list. And you can see it's got port, protocol, source IP address, or source destination address, and the action. So I'm going to create one to just demonstrate this. So let's imagine you want to allow the RDP traffic onto your network. So you've got an administrator has RDP. We're going to say add, and we're going to say either specific IP addresses are allowed, my IP address, so it can grab my IP address from my computer, and that's the one that's only allowed. The source port ranges can be any, so let's allow traffic coming in from any range. And in terms of the destination, can be any server that's running on the VNet, but we're going to choose port 3389, which is the RDP port. We could also choose RDP from this drop-down to save ourselves from typing it. You'll notice that RDP port 3389 is a TCP, and that is chosen for us. We are going to allow RDP traffic, and we have to give it a priority. So the lower the number, the higher the priority. And typically you're going to want to, you're not going to jam these together like 100, 101, 102, 103. You're going to want some space so that you can be flexible. So I'll leave this with the default 100 priority, which is pretty high. And we have to give it a name. I'm going to call it allow RDP. So if I was to then click add, right now this NSG is not associated with any network or any network interface card. But if I was to associate this with one of those two, then RDP traffic from my computer would be allowed over port 3389. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the NSG menu here, and we're going to choose outbound rules and minimize that. So you'll see by default that the virtual network traffic is allowed to communicate outbound to within the virtual network. So from VNet to VNet is allowed. And any device on the machine on the network is allowed to talk to the internet. That is allowed. But all other traffic is denied. So if we had another computer on another VNet or a VPN or something like that, this is going to basically be denied outbound. So if we wanted to specifically allow certain traffic outbound or deny traffic, so let's say we want to block traffic to the internet, then we would say add, and we're going to say any source, that is any resource that's already attached to this network. And for destination, I'm going to say service tag, and I'm going to choose internet. So that is any destination that is outbound to the public internet. And we're going to choose the HTTP traffic to block. So we're going to say any traffic. So let's say we want to block traffic to the internet. Then we would say add, and we're going to say any source, that is any resource that's already attached to this network. And for destination, I'm going to say service tag, and I'm going to choose internet. So that is any destination that is outbound to the public internet. And we're going to choose the HTTP traffic to block. So let's say we want to choose port 80 blocking outbound. And in this case, we're denying that traffic. Okay, so we do not want this service to talk to the internet. Now, I might use a higher number here because we want to allow, if we have to allow traffic, we would need to have lower numbers. And we're going to call this something that makes sense to us, deny HTTP. So now any network that this NSG is connected to will not allow servers to talk to public websites in secure port. Okay, so that rule takes priority. All right. So that's an overview of NSGs. Like I said, it can attach to the subnet or to a network interface card. Azure will evaluate both sets of rules together. So if you have an NSG assigned to your subnet and a different NSG assigned to your NIC card, then they're cumulative. So every NSG comes with a default set of rules, including deny all inbound and allow all outbound. These all have high priority numbers, so your rules can be overridden. And on the next video, we're going to talk about effective security rules, and we can verify which rules are really applied. NSGs are essential for secure access control in Azure, and is a core topic of this exam. Now, in the previous video, we created an NSG and we added some custom inbound and outbound rules. I mentioned that NSGs can be applied to both subnets and network interface cards. And Azure combines rules from both locations to determine what's actually allowed or denied, and these are called effective security rules. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to create another NSG, a different one, and we're going to have a virtual machine, and we'll connect one NSG to the subnet and a different NSG to the VM, and then we'll look at the effective rules. So I'm going to create another NSG, put it in the same group, and I'll call it NSG2. We'll say create. And in this second rule, I'm going to allow port 80 inbound onto this network, and we'll call this, we'll leave that as HTTP inbound. And I'm also will allow RDP traffic as I did with the other one from any source. All right, so this rule has no restrictions on source, but allows HTTP traffic and RDP traffic. Now for this virtual machine, I'm specifically not going to configure any inbound rules. We'll skip over the data. For network and security group, I'm going to say none because we're going to manually attach it. And I'll just say review and create. We'll let that be created. All right, so let's go to the resource, and we're going to go under the networking tab, and we're going to look at the network interface. And we can see that there's no network security group currently associated with it. So I'm going to associate one with it. I'm going to go into the network interface. Remember, we said that we could associate a network security group with either the network interface or with the subnet. So I'm going to choose the demo NSG to associate with the network interface card, and I'm going to say save. And we can go back to the overview here, and we can see that we've got the virtual network subnet. I'm going to click on that. And we're going to go into the default subnet. And we can choose the network security group from here, and we're going to put NSG2, the other one there, and say save. So now what we have are NSG applying to the network and an NSG applying to the card. So now if I go back to the virtual machine under networking, and I scroll, I can see both the network security group attached to the subnet, as well as the network security group attached to the network interface. So both of them are listed separately. We can see that there is, again, the tiny conflict of HTTP inbound being allowed by one but not the other. Now we can see these rules in one convenient location under the network interface card. If we click the network interface name, taken to the network interface, then what we're looking for is under Help, Effective Security Rules. And this will tell us which NSGs are in effect for this network interface. And then using that information, we can figure out why certain traffic is getting through and certain traffic is not. So we can see these are the two NSGs that are associated with this network interface. We can, from this convenient spot, view them. And then we can even download a copy which could help us diagnose. Let's say we know we're having trouble getting port 80 through. So if we focus just on the inbound traffic, we can see that we do have a rule on NSG2 that allows it, but we don't have a rule on the other NSG. So deny becomes the default. So we can work out that there's a conflict here. We can also do troubleshooting. There's a section under monitoring that talks about network troubleshooting. We can see why port 80 would be denied, but we can also download the rules and intuit that ourselves. So that is under help effective security rules. Hopefully that all makes sense. Leave a question in the Q&A section of the course if you have any questions about NSG. The inbound traffic, with this network interface, we can, from this convenient spot, view them. And then we can even download a copy, which could help us diagnose. Let's say we know we're having trouble getting port 80 through. So if we focus just on the inbound traffic, we can see that we do have a rule on NSG2 that allows it, but we don't have a rule on the other NSG. So deny becomes the default. So we can work out that there's a conflict here. We can also do troubleshooting. There's a section under monitoring that talks about network troubleshooting. We can see why port 80 would be denied, but we can also download the rules and intuit that ourselves. So that is under help effective security rules. Hopefully that all makes sense. Leave a question in the Q&A section of the course if you have any questions about NSGs. Now, when we created this network security group in the last video, we created a couple of rules and we allowed it to go to any destination. So when we created these two port 80 and 443 rules, we did not specify any particular destination. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete both of those rules, and we're going to re-add them with a specific destination in mind. Okay, so I'm going to say add new rule, and it's going to be the HTTP rule. I'm going to call this priority 1000. And instead of saying destination any, I'm going to say, I'm going to specify an IP address that's a destination. Now this IP address supports what is called CIDR notation with this /24 if you want. But I'm going to basically copy the IP address from our VM. So if I go to my VM here, I can see there's a couple of IP addresses. One is a public IP and one is a private IP. I'm going to copy the private IP just for this example, and I'm going to paste it here. And now we have traffic traveling from any source to this specific VM over port 80. And just for completeness, I'm going to add the other one as well. So we're going to say HTTPS IP address, same destination. All right. So now I've re-added the rules, but the rules only allow traffic into that single VM, right? This AZ new test VM is the only destination allowed to receive traffic. All other traffic over these ports to other destinations will be denied. Okay, now this can be very hard to manage. First of all, IP addresses can change. And second of all, you're going to end up with this list of IP addresses. Like I said before, you want your NSGs to be minimized, the number of NSGs. So let's say you only want 3 of them, even if you have 20 networks. But if you're going to start hard coding IP addresses in there, the list of IP addresses gets kind of long, and then doesn't mean anything to you. You look at this and what is that? So there's a solution to that called application security groups. So let's go to the top here and say application security groups. And an application security group is a logical grouping of resources that can be a destination. So I'm going to say create. And I'm going to make sure that is in my correct subscription. I'm going to put this into my NSG resource group, and I'm going to call this new ASG. ASG. And say create. And so, like I said, the application security group is a logical grouping of destinations. And so it really is an abstraction. I can add the IP addresses into this application security group. And then you only refer to the application security group when you are creating the NSGs. So you don't actually do anything within the application security group resource. We're going to go back to the virtual machine. So I go into virtual machine. I'm going to go back into the networking tab. And then under application security groups, there's this link, configure the application security groups. It can be a part of more than one application security group. I probably should have named this something more readable. So instead of new ASG, I could have named this front-end websites. And if I called this front-end websites, then it would be clear to anyone who sees it that this VM has a purpose, okay? So I add the VM to the application security group. Then I can go back to the network security group called new NSG, remember, under inbound security rules. You can't, unfortunately, edit a rule, so I'm going to delete this rule again. And instead of specifying it by IP address, I'm going to say add, and the destination is going to be the application security group, and then we can say the new ASG. And so this is the port 80 rule. Let's add. So now instead of specifying it by IP, I specify it by application security group, and then that becomes a lot more readable in terms of understanding that the intention is for traffic to go to the front-end websites as opposed to this by IP address. Add the HTTPS one as well. So the application security group really is just an abstraction of the destination instead of specifying a list of IP addresses, which may or may not mean anything to the person reading them and become unwieldy when you're really trying to minimize the number of network security groups and make it easier to manage and thus more secure. So we've seen that we can create network security groups to allow certain traffic inbound and outbound and deny certain traffic inbound and outbound. Diagnosing these issues can be a little challenging, and fortunately there are several tools in Microsoft Azure to help you diagnose these issues. I have a video later in this course talking about Network Watcher and IP flow and things like that. The one I want to talk about right now is called Connection Troubleshooter. So we're in the virtual machine under network settings, and I'm going to scroll down on the menu under help under connection troubleshoot. So let's say we've got this VM and for whatever reason, it is not able to do something we need it to do, connect to a server. So it's going to go from this virtual machine outbound to another location. Okay, so this is the source, is this VM. Now I'm going to enter Bing.com as the destination. Okay, so this machine, for whatever reason, cannot communicate with Bing.com, and I need to know why. I'm going to choose TCP protocol. Now, if I try port 80, we know this shouldn't work because we're blocking port 80 specifically in the NSG. So I entered port 80 in the destination, and I'm going to say run diagnostic tests. Now, the first time I run this, it needs to deploy a tool to the VM, an agent, so there would be a deployment involved. But I've done this before, so this is not doing the deployment right now. So this is going to take a couple of minutes, but it's going to try to communicate with Bing.com over port 80. Let's see what it says. All right, so I scroll down and we'll see that port 80 has not been reachable. It is blocked, and it tried 30 times and it failed 30 times. Now, what we would expect then is if we tried a different port, like 443, which is the secure port, and run the test again, this should succeed because we're not blocking outbound port 443. And we let that run. We scroll down, we see that it did work. So it tried 66 probes, 0 failed. And we can see amazing latency of 1 millisecond and maximum latency of 2 milliseconds. So the performance is incredible. But 443 worked because we don't block that port. So we can use Connection Troubleshooter to see what are the reasons why we can't connect one thing to another. Of course, if we had a virtual machine that we can try to connect to, we can just select it from a drop down here. So try Connection Troubleshooter if you ever want to see why your machine can't connect to something else that it needs to and it's failing.